It's wild how in the NFL, 1 minute you're the franchise quarterback, and then the next you're gone.
Yeah.
It's crazy, like a game of musical chairs almost, with huge stakes.
Right.
And we've seen some crazy quarterback moves lately, like Russell Wilson heading over to the Giants.
Yeah.
And then you have the whole Aaron Rodgers situation still up in the air with the Steelers.
It is.
So that's what we're going to be diving into today,
Yeah.
really digging deep into these quarterback moves.
Absolutely. And, you found some really interesting discussions on a sports YouTube channel. I was checking them out, too.
Yeah,
Really breaking down these moves and what they mean for these teams.
exactly. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today.
Yeah.
We're going to look at what this means for the teams right away, but more importantly, what does it mean for their future?
Right.
Especially with the draft coming up.
Exactly. The draft implications are huge.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, we're taking all that information, all that expert analysis, and trying to give you a clear picture of what's happening with these two quarterbacks and the teams they're involved with.
Right.
So you can walk away understanding, what the ripple effects are going to be.
For sure.
Especially on the Giants and the Steelers draft plans without having to listen to hours of speculation.
That's right.
So let's jump right into it. Russell Wilson wearing a Giants uniform. What's the immediate takeaway there?
Well, the big news, obviously, is Russell Wilson signing that 1-year, $21 million deal with the Giants.
Yeah.
But the initial reaction, it seems to be cautious optimism, mixed with a little bit of realism. I don't think Giants fans are throwing a parade just yet.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. And it's understandable why there's that hesitation, right?
For sure.
I mean, think about the Giants quarterback situation last season. It was a mess.
Oh, yeah.
They had Daniel Jones, Tyrod Taylor, Drew Lock, even Tommy DeVito got some playing time.
It was a carousel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, just having someone like Wilson, a proven veteran under center,
Sure.
has to be seen as an upgrade in terms of just basic competence.
Oh, yeah. Just stabilizing the position. Right.
Exactly. But then the YouTube analysis that we were looking at,
Yeah.
they pointed to his recent performance.
Yeah.
And it's not exactly inspiring.
Yeah. Yeah, he had a losing record in Denver. His passing yards were down.
Right.
And he had some real scoring struggles, especially towards the end of his time there.
One of the commentators even mentioned how he finished with 5 straight regular season losses,
Yeah.
plus a playoff loss.
Yeah.
And the Broncos offense just wasn't really clicking.
They were sputtering.
Yeah, so it's he might be an upgrade in terms of just the floor of the position, but how high is that ceiling?
Right. Is he going to be the guy to lead them to a Super Bowl? That's the question.
Exactly. And that leads us to the draft, right?
Yeah.
Because the Giants have that number 3 pick.
Yep. A valuable asset.
So how does signing Wilson affect their draft strategy?
That is the big question, isn't it? And even with Wilson coming in, the consensus seems to be that the Giants are still very much in the market for a quarterback in this draft.
Interesting.
The owner has said, finding their quarterback of the future is still a top priority.
Yeah, which makes sense when you think about it.
Right.
I mean, Wilson's getting up there in age. He's turning 37 this year.
He's not a long-term solution.
Exactly. And then you have Jameis Winston also on their roster. But he hasn't been a consistent starter for years.
You're right, 5 years at least.
Yeah, so that's not really a long-term solution either.
It's like they're screaming, we need a succession plan.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where signing Wilson actually gives the Giants a huge advantage.
How so?
Well, it gives them flexibility.
Oh, I see what you mean.
They're not in a position where they absolutely have to draft a quarterback at number 3.
They've got options now.
Exactly. They could draft a quarterback who might need some time to develop.
Right.
They could trade back from that 3rd spot and get more picks.
More draft capital.
Or they could even target a quarterback on day 2 of the draft.
Interesting. So many possibilities.
And, speaking of that number 3 pick, one name that keeps coming up is Shader Sanders.
Oh, yeah, he's a hot prospect.
What's the buzz around him within the Giants organization?
Well, from what I've seen, it seems like there's a real divide in opinion on Sanders.
Oh, really?
Some people in the organization are really high on his potential, but others have some serious reservations.
So what's the main point of contention?
It really comes down to whether he projects as a surefire high-end starter in the NFL.
That's a big question.
It is, can his skills and traits translate to that elite level of play consistently,
Yeah. And it's interesting because the analysts in those YouTube discussions were really emphasizing, focusing on his on-field abilities,
Right.
trying to strip away all the off-field stuff that sometimes comes with these high-profile prospects.
The noise.
Exactly. The core question is, can he play quarterback at the professional level?
That's it.
And because they have Wilson now?
Yeah, if the Giants aren't completely sold on Sanders as that, guaranteed
top-tier talent at number 3.
Yeah.
They can explore those other options we were talking about.
Right.
Like trading down or maybe even targeting a different position altogether.
Yeah, they could go for a generational edge rusher or maybe a blue-chip offensive tackle.
Exactly. Someone who can make an impact right away.
And then maybe develop a quarterback they draft later.
It makes a lot of sense.
It does.
Now, Booger McFarland had some interesting things to say about the Giants' quarterback situation and that third pick.
Oh, yeah. Booger always has some insightful takes.
What were some of the key things he was saying?
Well, his main argument was that if the Giants are really serious about finding a franchise quarterback with that number 3 pick, then Sanders might be the only quarterback in this draft class who has that potential.
Really?
He was saying that this year's quarterback class isn't considered that strong at the very top.
I see. He even mentioned some of the other quarterbacks who might be available later, like Cam Ward-Jackson, Dart Tyler Show.
Yeah.
And he implied that they might not have that same elite game-changing ability.
So basically, if they want a potential superstar, they got to go with Sanders.
That seems to be his take.
But then he also made a really important point.
What's that?
He said there are no sure things in the NFL draft.
Yeah, of course.
Even the best prospects can bust.
Yeah, of course.
Even the best prospects can bust, you know?
Right. Even the guys who look like can't-miss prospects.
Exactly. And it's worth mentioning, the Giants have never actually drafted a quarterback with a top 3 pick.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, so taking Sanders at number 3 would be a pretty big departure for them historically.
Interesting.
So it's really fascinating to see how they're going to play this.
It is. They're trying to improve in the short term with Wilson, but also find that long-term answer at quarterback.
A real balancing act.
It is trying to win now while also building for the future.
Exactly, and that's the constant struggle for NFL teams.
It is.
All right, let's switch gears now and head over to the AFC to Pittsburgh, where the quarterback situation is all about Aaron Rodgers and whether he'll join them.
The Aaron Rodgers saga continues.
It does. What's the latest buzz around the league about this potential move?
Well, according to Brooke Pryor's report, the longer Rodgers takes to make a decision about playing for the Steelers in 2025, the less likely it seems that he'll actually go there.
So the clock is ticking.
It is. And there's even some talk that he might be leaning towards retirement.
Really?
Yeah. And then there's another interesting possibility that he might be waiting to see if the Vikings change their stance.
Oh, wow.
Kind of like what Brett Favre did years ago when he was with the Vikings late in his career.
Yeah, I remember that.
Apparently, the Vikings general manager isn't completely ruling out Rodgers.
That's a wild card for sure.
It is.
So if Rodgers decides not to go to Pittsburgh, what are the Steelers' options?
Well, they've got a few paths they could take.
Okay.
They could look at some of the remaining veteran quarterbacks in free agency. Like who?
Names like Joe Flacco and Carson Wentz were mentioned.
Yeah.
They could also consider drafting a quarterback in this upcoming draft.
Right.
And we'll talk about their draft position in a bit.
Okay.
Or here's an interesting idea that came up in the discussion.
What's that?
The Steelers could try to accumulate compensatory draft picks.
Oh, that's a smart strategy.
Those are extra picks that teams get when they lose more valuable free agents than they sign.
Right.
And the idea would be to use those picks to trade up and get a top quarterback in the 2026 draft.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people are saying is going to be a really strong quarterback class.
So basically, Rodgers' decision is like a domino effect.
Yeah, it's a huge factor.
It affects their immediate plans and their long-term draft strategy at the most important position.
Absolutely.
It puts them in a really tough spot.
It does. And Booger McFarland even said that the Steelers are in a tough spot when it comes to their quarterback situation.
He pointed out that their draft position in recent years hasn't been great for getting those top quarterback talents.
Usually middle to late first round.
Right. And he even talked about how drafting Kenny Pickett was a sign of how hard it is to find a franchise quarterback outside the top few picks.
Yeah, I remember that.
And he really emphasized that the Steelers might need to make a big move.
Like trading up?
Yeah, if they want to land a quarterback with true franchise potential.
Because he doesn't think Mason Rudolph or Skylar Thompson are the answer.
He doesn't, and he highlighted just how hard it is to find another Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
Whether it's through the draft or finding a hidden gem later on.
It's a tough task.
It is, and McFarland really drove home the point that if Rodgers doesn't happen, the Steelers are going to be in a really, really tough spot.
It's a big if, for sure.
It is.
And for context, the Steelers currently have the 21st pick in the draft.
Yeah.
And while drafting a quarterback there was mentioned in the analysis, it didn't sound like that's the most likely or the best way to find their long-term answer.
Yeah, historically, quarterbacks drafted outside the top 15 or so picks don't usually become franchise quarterbacks.
Right. So the Steelers might need to get creative.
Yeah.
Maybe try to get Rodgers trade up in the draft, or even wait until next year to really address the quarterback position.
And focus on other needs this year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're seeing two very different situations here.
Yeah.
The Giants made a move with a veteran quarterback, but they're still looking to the future.
Right.
While the Steelers are in limbo waiting for Rodgers' decision.
It shows how different teams are approaching this quarterback puzzle.
And all the challenges that come with it.
For sure.
Okay, let's sum it all up for everyone listening.
Okay.
So the New York Giants, they addressed their immediate need at quarterback by signing Russell Wilson.
Yep.
But they're still focused on finding their long-term solution in the draft.
Right.
They've got some flexibility now, thanks to Wilson.
That's key.
Meanwhile, the Pittsburgh Steelers are in wait-and-see mode. They're waiting for Aaron Rodgers to make a decision, and that's going to have a huge impact on their quarterback strategy.
It will both in the short term and the long term.
Exactly. They might have to get creative in the draft or even look beyond this year.
It's a fascinating situation.
It is, and it just shows how these decisions are all connected. You know?
Yeah.
One move can create ripple effects across the entire league.
Absolutely.
It really makes you think about how these short-term moves for veteran quarterbacks can create these complex long-term challenges for NFL teams.
They're constantly trying to balance winning now with building for the future.
And it all comes down to that one position, the quarterback.
The most important position in all of sports.
And it really highlights the pressure to win right now in professional sports.
That constant pressure to succeed immediately.
Yeah, so it's going to be really interesting to see how these stories play out.
It is something to definitely keep an eye on.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us, everyone, for another deep dive.
We appreciate you listening.
We'll catch you next time.
See you then.